So in the last lecture, you learned how to detect the environment in which your application is running. One topic that goes hand in hand with environments is the topic of storing configuration settings for the application and overriding those settings in each environment. For example, in your development environment, you're going to use a different database or mail server. So in this lecture, I'm going to show you how to store configuration settings for your application and overwrite them in each environment. Now, there are various node packages out there for managing configuration. The most popular one is RC. So if you look up npm RC, look at the second link here, npmjs.com/package/RC. So you can see this package has been downloaded over 11 million times over the past month. It's a very popular package, but I personally haven't been very happy with this package. I've noticed a number of issues. That's why my personal preference is another package that is not as popular, but it has a very clean and elegant design, and it's really easy to use. So look up npm config. Again, look at the second link here, npmjs.com/package/config. So this package has been downloaded over 600,000 times over the last month. But it has a very active community. There are quite a few collaborators in this project, and I find it a better solution to manage the configuration of your applications. So back in the terminal, let's install the config module. Beautiful. Now back in the project. Here, let's create a folder called config. In this folder, we can have a default configuration file. So let's add a new file called default.json. So here we can have a JSON object to define the default configuration settings. For example, let's have a setting here called name. That's the name of our application. Now, back in the configuration folder, let's add another file, development.json. In this file, we can define the settings specific to the development environment. As part of this, we can override the settings that we defined in default.json. We can also add additional settings. So here I can change the name. I can override it saying my Express app development. We can also add additional properties here. And these properties can also be complex objects. For example, we can have a property called mail, where we store information about our mail server. So here we can have host, and let's set this to development mail server. Similarly, we can create another configuration file called production. So production.json. Now I'm going to go back in development.json, copy all this, paste it in production, and then change the name of the application as well as the address of the mail server. So prod mail server. So with this node package, you can easily see the default configuration as well as the configuration for each environment. It's very clean. It gives you a very clean structure. Now, back in our index.js, on the top, we load the config module and store it in a constant called config. And with this, we can easily get various settings for our application. So let's look at a few examples. Configuration. I'm going to do a console.log application name. Now here we could use a template string. That doesn't really matter. The way we use this config object is like this. So it has a get method. And here as an argument, we specify the name of a configuration property. So name. Now let's duplicate this. The other property I want to display is mail server. For this, we need to access this setting here, host, which is part of mail. The way we do this is using the dot notation, just like accessing properties of an object. So we want to get mail.host. Okay. Now back in terminal, I'm going to put this machine in the development environment. So export node_env. We set this to development and then run our application. So you can see application name is set to MyExpressApp development. This setting is coming from our development.json file. Similarly, our mail server is dev mail server. Okay. Now, if we change the environment to production, we're going to see different values. So export node_env. We set this to production and run the application one more time. Look, this time our mail server is prod mail server. So with this node package, you can easily store the configuration settings for your application. However, you should not store the application secrets in these configuration files. For example, you should not store the password of your database or your mail server, because when you check in your source code to a repository, that password or that secret is visible to anyone who has access to that source control repository. In fact, one of the famous financial companies in the US was hacked because someone checked in a password into a source control repository. So the way we deal with these secrets is by storing them in environment variables. Let me show you how that works. So back in terminal, let's define an environment variable for storing the password of a mail server. So export password, we set it to 1234. Now, to prevent this environment variable to clash with another environment variable, it's better to prefix that with the name of our application. Now, in this demo, let's say the name of our application is app. So we add app underline as a prefix. Okay? So in development environment, we manually set this environment variable. And also in production environment, we'll most likely have a configuration panel for storing our environment variables. So we store all these passwords and secrets in our environment variables and then read them using our config module. Now back in the project, in the configuration folder, we need to add another file called custom-environment-variables. Make sure to spell it properly. The name of this file is very important. So custom-environment-variables.json. And in this file, we define the mapping of configuration settings to environment variables. So I'm going to go in our development.json file, copy all this into this new file. Now let's say here for the mail property, inside that we're going to have a property called password. Okay, so we want to map this to the environment variable that we created. That was app underline password. Okay. Now we don't need host because we are not going to map this to an environment variable. The value is defined in one of our configuration files. Delete. And for the same reason, we don't need name. So in this file, custom environment variables, we only have the mapping of our configuration settings to environment variables. Now back in index.js, let's duplicate this line and display the password of the mail server. So mail password. And we get that from mail.password property. So this config object looks at various sources to find a value for this configuration. The source can be a configuration file, a JSON file. It can be an environment variable. It can also be a command line argument. For that, you need to look at the documentation yourself. Now, back in terminal, let's run the application. Okay, look, our mail password is 1234, and this was read from an environment variable, not a configuration file. Again, this config package has a lot of useful features, and I leave it up to you to read the documentation and learn more about this package.